What happened at this funeral left 200 people speechless. A small cemetery in Yorkshire, England. Rain falling softly on weathered headstones. About 200 people dressed in black, heads bowed in grief. But there's something strange about this funeral. Something that doesn't quite fit. Because hidden among the mourners, wearing a simple black coat with his hood pulled up, stands a man who shouldn't be there. A man whose presence at this humble ceremony would shock the world. His name? Prince William. But here's the thing that'll blow your mind. Nobody knew he was coming. Not the family. Not the press. Not even his own security team wanted him there. So what could possibly drive the future King of England to risk everything and attend the funeral of someone the world had never heard of? Let me tell you about Margaret Thompson. For 37 years, Margaret cleaned the corridors of Kensington Palace. Every morning at 5 a.m. she'd arrive with her cart of supplies, her worn rubber gloves and a smile that could light up the darkest hallway. She wasn't famous. She didn't give interviews. She didn't even have social media. But Margaret had something far more valuable. She had witnessed the most private moments of the royal family. The tears behind closed doors. The laughter echoing through empty rooms. The whispered conversations that shaped a nation. And Prince William? He'd known her since he was 8 years old. "Morning, Your Highness," she'd say every single day, even when he was just a boy racing through the palace halls, even when he was a teenager trying to sneak out, even when he returned as a man carrying the weight of his future crown. Margaret never asked for autographs, never leaked stories to the tabloids, never treated him like anything other than the boy she'd watched grow up. But 3 weeks ago, Margaret collapsed while cleaning the blue drawing room, the same room where she'd polished the furniture 1,000 times before, the same room where young William used to hide during hide-and-seek with Harry. She was rushed to the hospital, but it was too late. At 73 years old, Margaret Thompson's heart simply gave out. The palace issued a brief statement, standard procedure for long-serving staff. A private funeral was arranged in her hometown of Harrogate. Her family expected maybe 50 people to attend. They never expected a prince. William's private secretary had been clear. "Your Royal Highness, with respect, this isn't advisable. The security concerns alone," but William wasn't listening. He was remembering something Margaret had told him years ago, right after his mother died. He was 17, struggling with grief, and he'd found Margaret cleaning his room. She'd looked at him with those kind eyes and said, "Your Highness, the measure of a person isn't in their title, it's in how they honor those who helped them become who they are." So on this rainy Tuesday morning, against all protocol, Prince William drove himself 4 hours north to Yorkshire. No royal motorcade, no security detail, just a man in a rented car, determined to say goodbye. He slipped into the back of St. Mary's Church just as the service began, hood up, head down, hoping nobody would recognize him. But this is where the story gets incredible. Margaret's grandson David was delivering the eulogy. Mid-sentence, his voice cracking with emotion, he stopped. His eyes had found William in the back row. The entire congregation turned around. 200 people. Complete silence. You could hear the rain pattering against the stained glass windows. What happened next wasn't in any royal protocol handbook. William stood up, slowly. Every eye in that church following his movement. He walked down the aisle, his footsteps echoing in the hushed space, past the shocked faces, past the grandmother clutching her grandson's hand, past the fellow palace workers who couldn't believe what they were seeing. He approached the podium where David stood frozen, and then Prince William, future King of England, asked permission to speak. David, tears streaming down his face, simply nodded and stepped aside. William looked out at the congregation, at Margaret's family in the front row, at her friends and neighbors and co-workers who had loved her. "I know I shouldn't be here," he began, his voice steady but emotional. "And I know my presence has probably made this day even more difficult for Margaret's family." He paused, composing himself. "But Margaret Thompson helped raise me. Not officially, not in any way that would ever make the history books. But every single day, for nearly 30 years, she showed me what real kindness looked like." The silence was deafening. "When I was 8 years old and homesick at boarding school, I would call the palace just to hear familiar voices. Margaret would always answer the cleaning staff phone. She'd tell me about the dogs running around the corridors, about the new flowers in the garden, about normal things that made me feel connected to home. When I was a teenager making mistakes, Margaret never judged me. She'd just clean up whatever mess I'd made, literally and figuratively, and remind me that tomorrow was a new day." William's voice caught slightly. "And when my mother died, when the whole world was watching me grieve, Margaret was the only person who didn't try to say something profound. She just was there, quietly making sure life continued around me until I was ready to live it again. He looked directly at Margaret's daughter in the front row. Your mother taught me that true nobility isn't about titles or crowns or ceremonies, it's about showing up. Every day, even when nobody's watching. Especially when nobody's watching. Then William did something that made everyone in that church hold their breath. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, worn photograph. This is a picture Margaret took of me and Harry when we were children, playing in the palace corridor while she worked. She kept it in her cleaning cart for 25 years. Last week I found it on her hospital bedside table. His voice broke completely now. She'd written on the back, "My boys, so proud of who you've become." The silence shattered as half the congregation began sobbing. But William wasn't finished. Margaret's family, I know you planned a simple service, but your mother, your grandmother, she wasn't simple. She was extraordinary. And I want to make sure she's honored the way she deserves. He looked back at David. With your permission, I'd like to make a donation to establish the Margaret Thompson Memorial Fund for families of palace staff who need assistance with education, healthcare, or housing. Because Margaret believed in taking care of people, and that's exactly what this fund will do. David could barely speak through his tears, but he managed a "Yes, Your Highness." Then came the moment that nobody who was there will ever forget. Prince William walked over to Margaret's casket. He placed his hand on the polished wood, bowed his head and whispered something nobody else could hear. Later, Margaret's daughter would reveal what she thought she heard him say. "Thank you for everything, Margaret. I'll make sure the boys remember you." The boys, even now, even as a grown man and future king, he was still one of Margaret's boys. But here's the part that'll give you chills. As the congregation filed out to the cemetery, something beautiful happened. Word had somehow spread through the small town. People began lining the streets. Not to see the prince, they barely looked at him. They were there to honor Margaret. Shop owners stood in their doorways. Children held handmade signs that read, "Thank you, Margaret." An elderly man played Amazing Grace on his violin from his front garden. The funeral procession that had started with 200 people had grown to nearly 1,000 by the time they reached the cemetery. At the graveside, William stood with the family as Margaret was laid to rest. When it came time to throw dirt on the casket, he waited until last. And as he let the earth fall from his hands, a beam of sunlight broke through the clouds for the first time all day, illuminating the entire cemetery. Margaret's great-granddaughter, only 5 years old, tugged on William's coat. "Are you really a prince?" she whispered. William knelt down to her level. "I am," he said softly. "But your great-grandmother was the real royalty in this family." Before he left, William did one final thing that nobody expected. He approached every single person at that cemetery, all 1,000 of them. He shook their hands, looked them in the eyes, and thanked them for coming to honor Margaret. It took him 3 hours. 3 hours of meeting ordinary people who had been touched by one extraordinary cleaning lady. The press found out about William's attendance later that day, of course. The story exploded across every news outlet in the world. But here's what the headlines missed. They focused on the prince attending a commoner's funeral. They analyzed the security breach, the protocol violations, the political implications. They completely missed the real story. The real story was about a man honoring the woman who helped shape his character, about a future king who understood that true leadership means remembering where you came from and who helped you get there. The real story was about Margaret Thompson, who spent 37 years proving that the most important job in any palace isn't wearing the crown, it's making sure the person who does knows how to carry it with dignity. 6 months later, the Margaret Thompson Memorial Fund had raised over £2 million. It had helped 15 families pay for their children's university education, covered medical expenses for 12 retired palace staff members, and provided housing assistance to dozens of workers. But perhaps the most beautiful part of Margaret's legacy happened just last month. Prince William was walking through Kensington Palace with his own children, Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis. They passed a cleaning lady in the corridor, a young woman, probably in her 20s, working the early morning shift. William stopped. "Good morning," he said warmly. "Thank you for all your hard work." The young woman looked surprised but smiled back. "Good morning, Your Royal Highness." As they continued down the corridor, Prince George asked, "Papa, why do you always talk to the cleaning people?" William paused, thinking of Margaret's kind eyes and gentle wisdom. "Because, George, they're not just cleaning people, they're the people who make our home possible, and you must never ever forget that every person in this palace, from the Archbishop of Canterbury to the person who empties the bins, deserves your respect and gratitude." "Did someone teach you that?" Charlotte asked. William smiled, looking up at the portrait-lined walls that Margaret had dusted thousands of times. "Yes," he said quietly, "someone very special taught me that. Her name was Margaret, and she was one of the finest people I ever knew. And somewhere, in a small cemetery in Yorkshire, Under a headstone that reads Margaret Thompson, she made every place she touched a little brighter. The rain falls gently on fresh flowers that appear there every month. Flowers from a prince who learned that the crown you wear on your head means nothing compared to the kindness you carry in your heart. That's the story they don't teach you in history books. The story of how a cleaning lady helped shape a king, and how a king made sure the world would never forget her name. What do you think? Could you imagine having that kind of impact on someone's life just by showing up with kindness every single day? Let me know in the comments below.